All right. Welcome to Tempo Community Call, April 2023. What a year. We're going to start with some Red Hat devs, engineers showing us this Tempo operator demo, which is cool. And then we're going to review 2.1. So is it Andreas? Is that right? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yep.
I appreciate the PRs, Andreas. I recognize your name as soon as you jumped in here. You've had quite a few in Tempo, is that right?
No, I think just one. It was about the metrics. The extended metrics for some Golang memory statistics.
Oh yeah, that's in 2.1. Thanks. All right. Well, we'll give you the floor. Feel free to show us what you got.
Yep. Let's see if the screen sharing works properly. Can you see
a Firefox tab? Yep.
Okay, so hi everyone. In the last couple of months, we were working on a Kubernetes operator for the Tempo deployment. And exactly a week ago, we actually tagged our first release on GitHub. So it's currently in the OS observability GitHub organization, but we plan to transfer it very soon to the Grafana org. And today I want to give you a quick live demo about the current state of the operator. So I prepared a small Minikube cluster. So I set up Cert Manager. Cert Manager is used to generate the TLS certificate for the webhook of the Tempo operator. Then I set up a load generator, so I have a few traces in the Tempo once it's set up. And I installed kube-prometheus stack. So we have Prometheus and Grafana running. And for the object storage, I'm using a Minio instance. And here's the Tempo operator. So currently, we only support the microservices mode of Tempo, but probably in the future, we will also support the monolithic mode. So the main CR of the operator is the Tempo stack, like kind Tempo stack. It has a name, and in this quite minimalistic CR, we can see the storage. So in this example, I'm using Minio with S3. So currently, we support configuring S3, Google, Azure for storage. So this is the name of the secret where the credentials for the object storage are stored, which then later will be written to the Tempo configuration file. And the observability field is about observability of the Tempo operator and the Tempo components. So in this demo, I enabled that the operator creates service monitors for each Tempo component. And I also enabled the Jaeger query. So that means that the Tempo operator starts a new container with Tempo query, which provides a UI for, which exposes the Jaeger UI. Let's apply this file to the cluster. And then we should see all the Tempo components starting. So it's the compactor, distributor, ingester, querier, and query frontend. When you apply this CR to the cluster, we have a webhook which sets a lot of default options. So I'll just quickly go through kind of the CR. In the images section, you can specify which container image you want for the Tempo container. So of course, we only, like if you change the default setting, it needs to be compatible with the Tempo version, which is like the default Tempo version for one operator version. Because if you, for example, here just upgrade Tempo, it probably won't match the Tempo configuration file which the Tempo operator generates. But it's nice, for example, if you have some customizations which are not yet released, or then you can create your own container and use it here. Then some Tempo settings, so the limits, which then will be put in the Tempo configuration file. Then the observability settings, as mentioned before, these are for the operator and the Tempo components. Then we can set the replication factor of the deployment. Resources are the Kubernetes resources for CPU and memory. Then retention and so on. Count. Then the storage, where the storage secret is stored. Storage size is the size of the persistence volume claim, which is used for the ingester component. And in template, we have one section for each component. And in this case, I just enabled the Jaeger query. So we have the Jaeger UI frontend. And in the meanwhile, we hopefully, the load generator hopefully generated a few traces. So we can look at them in Jaeger UI, for example. Let's see if it works. Looks good. Find traces. And then we should see a few created. I tried it a few times. It always worked instantly. And now live demo takes a while.
I've not used the Jaeger UI in front of Tempo in a long time. I assume it still works. Hey, there you go.
Yeah, maybe it's just slow because, yeah, it showed up now, but it took a while. Maybe, I don't know, Google Meet also always takes a lot of CPUs on my machine. I think I have some issue with graphics driver, but finally it's here. And yeah, you can see the spans here. And because I enabled the service monitors, we also have metrics in our Prometheus instance, like all the metrics the Tempo components expose. For example, we can query the build info, and then we have one for each component, ingester, distributor, and so on. I also set up Grafana for this demo, and I imported the Tempo operational dashboard from the Tempo upstream repository, which shows us cool metrics. And like some graphs are not visible because the UC advisor, which I didn't set up locally. But yeah, the Tempo ones are showing stuff.
Cool.
And of course, you can also use Grafana to query Tempo. If you go to the search.
Got to get TraceQL in there. Come on now.
Yeah, I tried to enable it, but it needs still a feature flag. And I'm using the Cube Prometheus stack to deploy, like the Cube Prometheus stack, the Helm chart, to deploy Grafana, which embeds the upstream Grafana Helm chart. But I couldn't find any option to enable the feature flag. So did I miss something, or is it not there?
In the latest Grafana 9.5, is that what Grafana's on these days? It's enabled by default. There's no more feature flag, I think. So I think if you get the absolute latest Grafana, it'll just be there. Cool.
I thought I have probably Cube Prometheus stack is using an older Grafana version then, because it's using.
Is that true, Zach? Am I making that up? Does the latest Grafana enable TraceQL by default?
I looked yesterday and I thought 9.4.6 was the latest. But if you scroll to the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to see the version. It's on the bottom of like every Grafana page, I think.
9.3, yeah.
This one is 9.3. Yeah.
But in the Helm chart itself, you have access to the, if I remember correctly, it's like the grafana.ini, and you can do whatever you want basically in there. And that's where I think people are setting feature flags.
I didn't realize that. So I can
it's a little buried.
Grafana config there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little buried in there, and it's not exposed at a top level, so you kind of gotta, infer what you want to do with the Grafana ini file.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, next time for the next demo, I will make sure that I have probably an already up-to-date Grafana version which has it enabled by default.
That's right. We forgive you. We're just very partial to TraceQL lately.
Cool. How does this work with versions? Like we're about to cut 2.1 for Tempo. So how does the operator? Do you have to submit a PR to update the operator to the latest Tempo? How does that work?
Yeah, so basically because there are some breaking changes in the configuration file, so we kind of always need to sync the Tempo operator with the Tempo version. So there will always be required a new version, unless by chance the config file is exactly like doesn't bring any issues if you start it.
Yep.
So yeah, that was it basically from the demo. So yeah, as mentioned before, we plan to donate the repo anytime soon to Grafana.org.
Yep.
It's open source, and we are happy to get contributions.
Cool. Yeah, right. So we'll work that out. I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll get that repo over. I think we have to figure out like the docs publishing and stuff, but for the most part, this is awesome work, and it's going to be all ready to go soon. Can people pull it now? Is there like or I guess in the link will probably have like a README that shows how to actually make use of it now.
Yep. Yeah, we
There's
have
as well a website with quick starts.
Cool. I forgot we have a Grafana Slack channel. Cool. Awesome. This is awesome work. Thanks, Redhat, for putting the time in and building this. Yeah, I think it's cool that you all are participating in Tempo and helping us build this new tracing database. Just put it in OpenShift, make it the default OpenShift tracing database next. What's that take? Cool. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's move on to Tempo 2.1. I'll review the release notes a bit and kind of talk through some of the big things that are going on here. I'm going to share my screen so we can kind of all see this, because I'll probably pop back and forth between the doc and the release notes a little bit. I think this is the right one. I hope so. Yeah. Okay, so 2.1, we've cut RC0 yesterday. We had some pretty big merges right before we cut it, or it would have just done 2.1 directly. In particular, that's not what I meant to do. In particular, we updated OTel, and it's a pretty big update. So we're unsure. It's probably fine, but we thought it would make sense to be a little bit patient here and not just cut 2.1 immediately. So there's some big changes that went right before 2.1 RC0. We're going to let those kind of hang out for a little bit in our clusters before we, pull the trigger and just do 2.1 itself. I'm on the road a little bit next week. I'm going to be in Chicago for the Observability Con thing. But I really want to release 2.1 next week. I think there's a good chance we're going to cut it next week, depending on kind of how slammed I am with the Observability Con stuff. Breaking changes. So we've removed search. This was announced with V2 or with 2.0. V2, the old V2 style blocks, we're going to leave, and we're going to continue to support for trace by ID. But we removed all the search code related to that. And that includes a couple of options here and a metric. So these just don't make any sense anymore, and they've been pulled from the configs and the metrics. So the old V2 blocks hopefully have fallen out of retention since you've installed 2.0. And it won't matter because you have a bunch of Parquet blocks. And if you're continuing to run V2 because you are doing your lookups through maybe exemplars or through logs or something, then you can continue and always continue to use Tempo in this older mode. And it'll be just a trace by ID database, which is totally fine. We changed metrics names. So tons of our metrics started with Cortex. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Mario noticed it and finally fixed it. But we had tons and tons of metrics just because we had this old Cortex dependencies, which are now like Mimir and dskit dependencies. But we've changed all those prefixes to tempo _, which is mainly like a clarity thing, right? So you probably don't even look at any of these metrics because they're really weird metrics. But if you do, heads up, or if you see something break or a dashboard change, you might want to keep an eye on that. And then we added this idea of, we're trying to figure out how to do SLO metrics based on, or SLOs based on both throughput and latency on a query. And we felt like the best way to do that was just kind of add this feature into Tempo. So you can configure an SLO in Tempo, and it will just track metrics for the number of queries that come in that meet the SLO, whether that's by the latency or by the total bytes scanned. Or you can, and you can build like metrics out of that. So we're going to start using this in our cloud, Grafana Cloud stuff, which is why we needed that feature. So this might be kind of niche. I'm not sure who else might use this, but heads up in case you really want to do throughput-based SLOs. let's see. Other interesting things, Go updated. Hopefully that won't break anything too terrible. Feature-wise, we do have a number of new TraceQL features. We support kind, which is a cool one. So I don't know why we didn't do this with 2.0. I think we just missed it. But we have kind as like an intrinsic in to the span. Every span has a kind. So it can be like kind server. You can search for that. You know, kind client. There's also producer and consumer, and I think some ones that I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. So consumer and producer tend to refer to like often like queue-based traces, like consumers pull from queues, producers push to queues, and then server and client kind of are more traditional HTTP request or network style request types of spans. So it's kind of a cool addition. You can write a query like this now, kind equals server. And so this would look for, you know, any endpoint, like an HTTP or gRPC endpoint that took over 1 second, for instance, by kind of focusing down onto the server kind. Cool. Oh, we added arbitrary math. So let's put some TraceQL stuff in here. Well, this is a fun one to add because it makes for silly queries. But we added arbitrary math, so you can do this. Kind. I'm just gonna make a giant tree here. Math. So you can do like you know, span dot bytes processed greater than 10 times. So you can do this kind of work, which is fun. So you can write mathematical kind of statements in your query, and it will do the right work. You know, it'll correctly do the stuff. You could also do the opposite of this. So we could go, you know, span dot bytes process divide. It makes more sense to you. It might be useful to write some queries that read a little bit better than having to type that full number in there. You might find some other uses. Technically, you can do stuff like this, you know, span dot jobs divided by span dot bytes or something greater than some threshold, 3. You can, if you have different number attributes, you can do math with those as well. So that's another addition to TraceQL in this release. We added new aggregates. So previously we had average and count, I think. We've added min and max. So min of some field greater than a value. And then we've also added max. I thought there was a third one. My changelog entry said, min, max, and average, but we had average, right? That's incorrect. Let's go look at that, because average was in 2.0. Sum, my bad. That's I should fix that changelog entry. So then sum. I don't know why you would ever want to sum a bunch of durations, but hey, maybe you do. Greater than whatever. So min, max, sum are new aggregates in TraceQL, which is a cool addition. We fixed some bugs. Before this would return, let's see, number comparison. Before this would return nothing, which was kind of difficult to understand, but we've fixed it so that all numbers compare to all other numbers. It was due to the data type. So integer compared to float would always return false. So we fixed all the number type comparisons to work. And any number compared to any other number will convert correctly. So this will now return traces, where that would not have returned traces in 2.0. Oh, and then I think Jenny, who is not on this call, fixed an issue where you couldn't write this duration greater than 1.5 seconds. You had to write duration greater than 1, you know, or 1 second and 500 milliseconds. You had to write that basically. But now we've made it so you can do like float durations, which is kind of nice. It is a little bit more succinct. It doesn't really add new abilities, but it is, I think, a lot more natural to write that 1.5 seconds than to like 1 second, 500 milliseconds, which worked, but was kind of annoying. So I think those are the TraceQL fixes and features. This is a big one too. Where's the well, I can't find it, but there is a really good, there was a really nice improvement to TraceQL performance where we pull a lot less data before we when we assert the conditions. So previously we would actually pull far too much data and then assert the conditions and throw a bunch of it away. We made a change to target the data that we pull a lot tighter, and it makes for a much more efficient TraceQL queries. We do have ways to go to continue to improve it, but this release you should see some really nice changes. It'll also let you, this particular improvement, performance improvement, and it's particular on memory and bandwidth. This will let you increase the target job size bytes in the query front end. You can really beef this up quite a bit. We run it as 200 megabytes in our cloud offerings, and I think like 700 megabytes in our internal ops cluster. So if you are seeing performance issues with TraceQL, I'd recommend one thing is to increase target job size bytes a lot in the query front end and to use 2.1. I think both of those together will be really nice. Is there anything else? Oh, Alton, who I don't think he made it to this call, added the ability for the metrics generator to attempt to like upsample, basically using X sample ratio. So the metrics generator just counts spans, exactly as they receive them. But OpenTelemetry has added, in one specific case, some information about the ratio of the spans, like how many spans that one represents, and you can use that with this PR to inflate your metrics to better represent the real traffic, the true traffic, before sampling, which is kind of cool. Oh, this is a funny one. This was broken before. You couldn't do this. This is a TraceQL query that didn't work, which was weird. You couldn't write count greater than -1. That broke. So that's been fixed, and you can do negative values in your aggregates. And I think that might be roughly it. Zach, do you know of anything else in here that's worth calling out? The check config flag. Oh, Azure workload identity. So a new way to auth to Azure backends. I think those are the big ones.
Yeah, lots of good stuff going in.
Right. This vParquet2 is kind of a cool change. It's not default yet, but we're trying to build a Parquet file that works with a wider array of tooling. And we found that some of the choices we made, for whatever reason, are not compatible with off-the-shelf Parquet tooling. So Adrian worked on this, and this brings us closer to that. And it also adds a couple of columns that we're going to use for structural queries. So those are queries like the descendant operator and the parent operator and these things, sibling operators. We need to add a couple more columns, and they were added in vParquet2. So he's working on populating those columns, and then we'll be able to add the functionality or those descendant operators, which I think are probably one of the most exciting things about TraceQL. And definitely looking forward to that. Cool. All right, I think that's a good overview of 2.1. Any questions about 2.1 or TraceQL or just run and tempo or anything else?
Actually, yeah, I was testing. I was talking with Marty because I was having some issues querying. I was doing some querying that were using some tags that has not columns in Parquet, and looking in the last 24 hours. I had six queries with 2 cores and 8 GB of memory, and they were just dying all the time, just restarting. Then I try with main branch, so well, now the 2.1, and yeah, the problem looks like it's solved. Now I can do even a 7 days view that I couldn't do before.
Cool.
That's I would like if I can also configure the columns myself. Like if I know that, because for example, I know that Tempo has HTTP dot, I think URL, no, was URL, yeah, as a column. But target for me is better in some cases to aggregate because it doesn't contain query strings. So I wanted to do some aggregations there, and I couldn't because it was just dying because of this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Adrian is working on that project as well. I think he's trying to weigh, there's two directions we've been talking about going, and it's something that's on his list. One is where you configure it. So you like statically configure, these are my special columns. And you get to name the columns that get pulled out into that, into those extra columns. He is really hot on trying to just make every column dynamic, though, which would be amazing, but I think very difficult. So it's a discussion we're having internally. We are moving forward with it. We totally agree it needs to exist. We want it for our cloud offering because we have tenants who have all kinds of different columns. It doesn't make sense for us to use only the columns we've picked. So we definitely want it, and we're just trying to figure out the best path to it. But it's definitely being worked on. So we'll get there eventually. And then, yeah, query should go super fast then. I know, man. I want the dynamic columns. I really want the full dynamic columns, but it's tough. It's really tough. Something else I've been thinking about lately and putting a lot of time into and talking to the team about is kind of the experience of writing queries. Something I want out of TraceQL and I want out of the front end as well, I've been talking to Grafana about this, is an experience where the results of the query is more valuable. Because right now you write a query and you want to go jump over to the trace, but I want an experience where the information you get back from the query is immediately useful, more useful than it is now. So you like write queries and learn things about your traces and not jump to a specific trace, but like repeatedly write traces to get aggregate information. Like you could do like a grouping, right? Like average duration group by service name. And then I want a result set that immediately communicates that to you. And maybe you jump over to some specific traces, but I want that like data right there immediately in front of you. So that's something we've been working on internally. I've got a couple design docs out on, and I really want to move forward, but I really want the TraceQL like experience to be like a learning experience where you're writing a query and learning about your traces and the structure of your data and iterating on that and as you're iterating on that, I want you to learn, and then eventually you get to the results you want. And that comes from just like my own experience using Prometheus and Loki. Like when I'm writing a Prometheus query, I'm learning the whole time. I write a very basic query and then I aggregate by this, and then I make a change. I do a histogram on I can pop the histogram value around a little bit, the quantile. And that like learning experience teaches you about your application. I really want the same for traces. So it's something I've been trying to drive internally some, and I think that's kind of be the next step for TraceQL is a better experience in the front end and not, I think it's a powerful query language and it's going to get better and better, but I want the experience to also match the like power of the language. That was just some random
Sounds
thoughts.
super exciting.
Thanks, Zach. I know you're excited about it, bud.
I'm
You're
very
paid to be
excited.
excited about it. But I know you're excited about it too. Thanks, bud.
The other thing I'm excited about that I don't think we're ready to share any screenshots of, but there's some work going on in Grafana that is going to make viewing large traces way better. And we got a little preview of that. I don't think we're ready to show anything, but it's going to be awesome. So stay tuned.
Can we show that video that was shared? You
Maybe.
have asked. You should have asked before you said that, Zach. You can't say that. Why don't you see if we can share the video, and if you can,
maybe next time.
Put it in the Slack or something.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. It's totally unfair to do that to these fine people. All right.
Got to get them on the edge of the seat.
That's right. All right. Anything else?
I have a question, if you don't mind me asking. What is the reasonable time frame for a search by trace ID to return back? Like what is the with the 2.0 you would say is a reasonable time for a search by trace ID to return with a large amount of data set, like in terabytes?
That's a good question. In our ops cluster, let me go do some digging. We get a trace back, I think, in what do you say, Zach? A couple seconds. And we're talking about, I don't even know off the top of my head, over a petabyte of data, billions of traces. It does require some tuning when you get much larger. There's some touch points. There's some things you can hit to improve trace queries. And I do want to make better improvements to it. Like it's kind of been an area that we've ignored a little bit while we've done the TraceQL and the Parquet, and I know it slipped from V2 in terms of performance, just the trace by ID search. But in our ops cluster, I'd say 4 to 5 seconds for billions of traces in a terabyte. So it's one of those things that I want to improve, but is not glaring, and so I've not pushed on it. Are you seeing very long time periods?
Yeah. Like in our production cluster, basically in stage, we get data back in 2 seconds, but in production cluster, we have been having with this weird issue in last 2 days. Like one of our clients went rogue and he pushed a ton of data. And so now we have like 40 plus terabytes of data, but when we are trying to query in last 1 hour or last like couple of hours, like a hourly time zone, and the trace queries take like more than 60 seconds, or like sometimes it just times out. And so we try tuning like the workers, we try tuning bunch of other settings like on the query front end and query. So I was wondering like what is the reasonable workflow here?
I think the things I would look at if you're kind of in this world is definitely the query shards.
Okay.
So query front end trace by ID query shards, set that to 250. There's a max of 255 because of the way Ananya wrote it 3 years ago. If anybody wants to take that to make the query shards that they can go higher, please do. It's a issue that's marked like a good first issue, and we just have never had time. But put that to 250. That's a good initial thing to do.
Okay.
How I think the next questions I would have is like how long your block list is. The longer the block list, the more time it's going to take, and I would encourage you to increase compactors.
Okay.
We've seen our current block list is around 20 to 30,000, but we've seen it in the 80 to 100,000, and in the 80 to 100,000 range, trace by ID search really did suffer. It became sporadic. It was harder to figure out. It was harder to do.
Okay. The block list is at this moment at 50,000. We are trying to bring it down. But yeah, it's in 50,000 for sure.
Yeah, so 60 seconds is way too long. We can get it below 60 seconds, but 50,000 is kind of approaching sizes where we have seen longer times for traces, but definitely not 60 seconds. The size of the trace also matters a lot. If it gets into the tens or hundreds of megs, then Tempo does struggle to return traces at that size.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't seem a lot because it's been like sporadic on few services, but so I was just trying to understand where this might be happening. But query shorts, bringing the block list back to a normal state, and the third option you said is, what was it again?
I would just review the size of the traces. So we had a customer try to pull a 400 megabyte trace a couple days ago, and they filed an issue like, we can't get this trace. I'm like, it's 400 megs. Like, sorry, Tempo cannot return your 400 megabyte trace to Grafana. So the size of the trace does impact it a lot. What I would do is after you try those things, start a discussion on the GitHub. So that's a great place to have kind of like a long running conversation about tuning. We just went through one on compacting and pushing blocks. I think we have one going on. Somebody's looking at TraceQL sharding. So if the best thing you can do is file an issue there and put your config, give us some good metrics, and we're probably just it'll go back and forth for a couple of weeks, but hopefully we can get you in a place where it's working better.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Just curious, you guys were chatting about block list. Is that in the compactor config settings, or?
The compactor pushes the block list down, but there's no like max block list length. It's really your retention, right? So it'll start deleting blocks after the retention gives up. But there's a metric called tempodb _ block list _ length or something. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but that'll tell you how long the block list is. And yeah, like I said, 20 to 30,000 has always been fine for us, and it's always been our target. 80 plus is when we really started to see problems and started panicking a little bit.
I see. Yeah, so it's more of a metric than a configuration.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to do retention based on total count, like just retention based on 20,000 blocks, whatever that turns out to be, and just delete the oldest blocks when you hit that. But I don't know. Not sure if anybody used that or not.
Just out of curiosity, what is like block list? Block list is the count of blocks which we have in the backend, in the storage, or is it something else?
That's it.
Okay,
Yep.
it's the count. Okay.
And the reason that impacts trace ID search is because we have to look in every single block.
Yeah.
And so compactions, if we didn't have trace by ID search, compaction would be way less important. Because keeping that list down is what makes search better. Oh, another thing you can do is use memcached. So with memcached, you can cache the Bloom filters, which reduces pressure on S3 or Azure or whatever, and should speed up your queries a bit as well.
Yeah, we do have memcache. I mean, the block list comment was helpful. I will try to get the block list count down.
Cool.
Maybe if you have 1 minute, I can show also what I mentioned in the last community call. Like I built, it's very hacky, but I built a little Grafana thing to aggregate the tempo traces, well, spans. And I think it is a little bit aligned with what you were saying, like how we analyze the data when there is an error, how we see, how you go into it, get familiar with what is going on.
Yeah,
maybe I can show it. It is not pretty. It is. I will show you a test environment. Oh, I need to give permissions to this. Wait a moment.
Sure. Fausto's been talking about this for a while, and I've been excited to see it. I might make you write a blog post about it or something, Fausto. Sorry, bud.
Oh, I need to quit and re-enter to be able to access.
Sure.
Give access.
What is your? Sorry, I can't see your name there. Is it Shubanshu? Shubanshu?
Yeah, Shubanshu.
Okay. What is your ingestion, like your bytes per second? Do you know off the top of your head, roughly?
I don't know the bytes. I knew the samples yesterday was like around 150K, and it went down. We got it down to 70,000 spans per second. I can quickly take a look at that. I don't know.
That's pretty good. 150,000 is a sizable cluster. That's nice.
Yeah. That's why we were struggling yesterday. But yeah.
How many queries do you run?
So we have been playing with a lot with queries because again of the traffic. We were running like 10 queries yesterday, and then that didn't help because again it was like I don't know why, but for somehow our requests were like even though query frontend said the requests were over, like timed out, the query kept on searching for those blocks, and that kind of increased the load on the backend. And so we were getting read timeouts back again. So what we ended up doing was bringing it down to 5 and seeing if that helped. That kind of helped for a bit, but still we are still seeing some issues. So yeah,
Let's chat in a discussion. I think you're onto something important. We run like 50 to 100 queries. So we run very small, tons of very small queries.
Okay.
So that would be my recommendation. But I have always been suspicious that a context cancel does not correctly propagate through the entire system. So if you're seeing that, I don't doubt it. So if you got us some graphs and metrics and logs to help us track this down, I think we could probably help diagnose it and fix it for both of us.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right, Fausto, what you got?
Let me try again. Can you see my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So normally, so normally we have this, right? So we just write some queries, and if you want, and there is a trick that you can do this, for example, and then tempo will return this attribute back. That's quite neat because now I can use this to build aggregations. So if I take this same query here, I just built this very silly thingy, but I can now do aggregation. So now I can see, for example, in this environment, the count by status code. The way how it decides which attribute to aggregate is the one that has the wildcard. So I can put whatever with wildcard, and then it knows, okay, I want to see that. So I can modify this now and say, okay, I want to see all the 404s. And then I want to see which service is doing that. I don't have autocomplete, so that's not nice. But yeah, now I know it's some service called PHP something is the one who is doing all of this. So it already narrowed down the issue for me. So a lot of times when I'm looking errors, I just try to just narrow the issue to see what is the root cause. And so far, this is it's helping me. It's quite simple, but like this, I can do like nice aggregation, easy aggregations of the data that we have. And with real data is just better. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that a Grafana table or a Grafana plugin? How did you do that processing?
So I'm using, maybe I can share also. Well, I'm using a plugin called Infinity. So Infinity, sorry, it's a data source, and it allowed me to do like HTTP requests, and then I have like a small backend service. It's just a small Go application that is doing this aggregation for me, and send it back to Grafana. You already aggregated, and then I can just show it in a table. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Yeah, I think that's really neat, and it is really in line with what I'm thinking about next. So it's cool that you're already doing it. It's so worth doing. You wrote a whole service to do it and hacked it in Grafana. I think that kind of validates some of the thoughts we've had. As we work on this, we'll definitely talk about in the community call. I want your thoughts on it, Fausto, as we move forward with it, because you're, using something very similar here. Cool. Cool. All right, team. How we doing? Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for joining. And I will see you in a month. And if anybody's in Chicago next week, I'll be there. Find me. All right. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.